Welcome to my presentation on temperature and altitude. In this presentation, I'll be going over how temperature and altitudes affects the body and how it affects us during sports performance. So, temperature overview. So, when the body is hot, um, the arterioles vasodilate, so the arterioles get bigger, allowing for a bigger blood flow and like a bigger blood flow through the arterioles, and this will allow for blood to get closer to the skin surface, which allows for the skin to cool um, closer to the skin surface and then circulate back around the body and therefore cooling down the body. And when the body is cold, the arterioles vasoconstrict, so the blood is pulled away from the skin to keep the blood warmer within the body, so there's no temperature decrease in the blood from the skin being cold, and that saves heat and therefore saves the body energy from warming the body up. But the human body doesn't like change, and this is known as homeostasis. So wherever the body can remain in a normal state or at temperature of 37 degrees Celsius core temperature, that's what the body will do. So hot temperature. In hot temperatures, there can be excessive sweating, and due to excessive sweating, there can be dehydration. So dehydration will affect the performance and therefore will not get the best results. So if you look at a tennis match in Australia, they normally play tennis matches late at night because in the middle of the day that would be far too hot to play the game, and therefore performance would be dramatically decreased with factors such as heat stroke coming in. So as you can see in the picture, there's a fan behind the participant. There's towels next to him. He's got 3 bottles of water to keep hydration optimal. He's got plenty of towels and like spare clothes so that the clothing can breathe and therefore it's not making another skin surface to keep the body a lot hotter. And then sometimes you would see people standing over them with umbrellas to cool them down between games and sets. Um, so a way that the body tries to cool itself down is by sweating, and this can the sweat can act as a coolness for the skin and therefore cool the body down. But then we've also got extreme cold temperatures. So there's events such as polar marathons, which is a marathon across the North Pole, so that's at the extreme cold temperature. But then there's other sports that are played in the cold temperature, so like football, so American football in a lot of states in the USA. During the season, they'll be played in snow, and they have to wear the same clothing. Um, so that can also affect performance because the arterioles will vasoconstrict, um, and therefore um, lead to less blood flow around the body. So therefore, the muscles aren't getting as much oxygen, and therefore the muscles can't fire and can't utilize energy production as quickly because they're not getting the required amount of oxygen. And then sweat glands will decrease, shivering will decrease, so the body will become less in a homeostasis sort of state, which the body will try and get out of. But ways of getting around this could be like extra layers of clothing. But then when you're playing in a sport such as American football, it's limited amount of clothing, so that could be quite hard. So hypoxia. Um, so hypoxia is just altitude. So there's various different levels of altitude. You've got sea level, which is where the body and the lungs will be fully saturated, um, and at rest they will carry around 4 pairs so 100%, and then drop off about 25 to 50% at the resting muscles, and at sea level this will be 75% at exercise. However, as we go up in altitude, the body will become more reluctant to give off oxygen molecules to the working muscles, and therefore at rest it will still be around 25%, but at um, exercise it'll be a lot less. So you could be looking around 50% between 75. So that can have an impact on the working muscles because they're not getting enough oxygen, and therefore performance will be decreased. However, Mexico 1968 Olympics was at about 3,000 feet above sea level, which is quite high altitude, and this had many effects for endurance athletes. However, for sprinters, um, people like Usain Bolt back in the 1968 Olympics, they would have found it a lot easier because the air can be thinner, so the pressure in the air is thinner because there's still the same amount of oxygen levels. It's just that the partial pressure in the air is less. So this can help sprinters because it can reduce headwind, and that can also help long jumpers because the pressure in the air will be less. So for them to jump through it, they'll get less drag and therefore get a further distance and a better score. Um, so it doesn't affect anaerobic participants, but it does affect endurance athletes because they're going to be hitting the wall and hitting their lactic acid threshold a lot sooner because the oxygen is not going to be wanting to go to the working muscle. The body will want to hang on to it. So here we can see the same oxygen but different partial pressure. So wherever you go, there will be the same amount of oxygen in the air, just a different partial pressure, which means that it won't go to the alveoli in the lungs at the same pressure, which means the body will struggle to get blood around the body. So that's an increase in breathing rate, an increase in heart rate because you've got to breathe in harder and faster for the body to get the same amount of oxygen than it would at sea level, and therefore that will raise the heart rate because it's got to pump more oxygenated blood around the body. So this will therefore reduce maximum oxygen uptake, so VO2 max. So this is where endurance athletes will struggle. However, adaptations, so universities and athletes have started using altitude chambers and tents to replicate the altitude levels, but at sea level. So athletes don't have enough money or funding to go to places like Kenya. So endurance athletes, so like Kenya, to get the live at high altitude or train at high altitude. So universities and sports complexes have started introducing altitude chambers to replicate this but at sea level because it's more accessible. So they can live at sea level but train at an altitude in the chamber, and this will be hugely beneficial for them. So this makes them more accessible and more affordable. Many athletes don't get the funding to be able to travel, and then this will help the body to adapt, and then the body will adapt, be able to change, and therefore performing at sea level will become easier due to an increase in red blood cells, spiking a bigger um, influx of the hormone erythropoietin, so EPO, and then that will make more red blood cells in the body because at altitude the body needs to work harder. So the saturation of oxygen will be a lot less due to the amount of pressure within the lungs. This is because the pressure in the lungs will be less, which means that the body will have to save more oxygen to transport around the body instead of dropping more off at the muscles. This means that the muscles will fatigue quicker because the body will be reluctant to move the oxygen. So if you're at altitude for a long time, you can get symptoms such as headache, nausea, and vomiting, dizziness, tiredness, loss of appetite, upset stomach, feeling of unsteady or unsteadiness, shortness of breath. These are all factors that affect people differently, and they might come at different times. But to measure and scale this is a LOQ, so this stands for the Lake Louise um, definition of altitude sickness, and this is just a rating of how serious the symptoms are, and as you move up the scale you'll reach a certain point. If you reach a certain point you have to get down or start descending as soon as possible to help reduce the symptoms. So that has been my temperature and altitude presentation.